Welcome, mere mortalites, to another conversation. Yesterday, I had on my friend Pete SMISSEN from the Aussie English podcast for his 5th appearance on the Mere Mortals. Yes, indeed, he is a regular. One of the things I love about Pete is that the conversation just flows. I don't have to try at all. And so I have all of 25 words here written on my prep sheet. What I can tell you that we talked about was we start off with the powerlessness you can sometimes feel whilst raising children due to their genetic inheritance, their character that is already established within them at such an early age. We talked about persuasion tricks, how confident speakers sometimes might be making up for a lack of actual knowledge and facts, which led on to cryptocurrencies and how he's not a big fan of them, of scammers, of marketers, of influencers. We talked about the future of music and how this might be occurring through something like split payments and streaming. We talked about AI experimenting that he's been doing on his podcast and my own consumption of some AI media and whatnot. We're all over the place. Wide-ranging conversation. I really do hope you enjoy. And now to Pete.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know at what age they start to take hygiene a little more seriously and stop spreading things as quickly. Like if you were to track how frequently kids got diseases, illnesses, and then spread it to other people in the family, at what point in their age does that start to diminish in frequency? So, is it happening 10 times a year when they're at daycare, and then when they go to primary school, it's more like 8 to 6, and then when they're at high school, it's more like 5. So, does it correlate with hygiene and their awareness of, covering their mouths when they sneeze and all that sort of stuff? Or is it something that's just passed through the air and it's unavoidable one way or another and makes no difference?
I've actually seen something with this. It was a video related to disgust sensitivity. And it was basically they would get children and they'd have a cockroach or a dead cockroach or something. And then not just with children, but it was primarily focused on like children going up to like teenagers or something. And, they would put a cockroach in a glass of orange juice or something. And the child would watch it go in. And then it's like, do you want to drink the orange juice? And, at a certain age when they just so young, they just don't even understand. So they just drink the orange juice with the cockroach in it.
Yeah.
Then, you ask the same thing to an adult and they're like, absolutely no way. Then there's this weird intermediate zone when they'll put the cockroach in, then they'll take it out, and young children who would not want to drink it when the cockroach is in there, once it's been taken out, they still don't have this, I don't know what it is called. It's something related to the transferability of the cockroach into the orange juice or something like that. And so then at a certain age, that you'll take the cockroach out, they'll still drink it. And then once they reach I can't remember what exactly it is. You might know this, or you might start to see it with your kids soon, where they'll realize like, no, the cockroach has kind of tainted the orange juice, so I'm not going to drink it now.
Do you remember what age that was vaguely? Like, was that around, under 5, 6, 10, 15?
Yeah, I was gonna I don't think it's that late. I think it was closer to the 5 to 6 range, something like that. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to do those experiments. My niece is 6 this year and my son is 4 this year. So it'll be interesting. And my daughter's 2. So it'd be funny comparing them. Yeah, that's it. Oh no, but it is gross sometimes. Some of the crap you see them just doing or grabbing or touching. And I mean, they've got no awareness. They have to learn all this stuff. But at the same time, you're just like, oh, why would you do that? Why would you put that in your mouth? Why would you, my daughter picking up a rock off the ground next to a dog poo and putting it in her mouth or something. And you just be like, oh, cringe, Jesus,
Do you, so you're very like into science. I mean, you did a whole, PhD on biology. Do you ever do kind of scientific experiments with your kids? Because my dad used to do that all the time. He'd try and teach us science through things we'd enjoy. So we always used to be like, Dad, don't get home brand cola. It tastes like shit. It's nothing like Coca-Cola. And he's like, well, let's find out. And so we'd do these, blind studies where he would pour in different things into different cups and we would have to prove that we knew which one tasted like Coke and which one was the fake.
I've started dicking around with my kids with that sort of stuff, but I wouldn't call it a scientific experiment.
Yeah, even so, just like fun little things, yeah.
Yeah. But often, yeah. So trying to think of good examples, but we'll do things like adding the sauce in, not adding the sauce in for pasta or something, and seeing if it makes a difference with them eating the food. Or, you're just constantly having to tinker with that sort of stuff anyway to work out what they're going to have. Like at the moment, my daughter has, I don't know, we initially thought it was an eating disorder. I can't remember the acronym for it, but it starts with A. There's some kind of eating disorder that young children can get where they're pretty much averse to everything. And she's had something like that, where she has this very strong personality, where she's probably the most stubborn child that I've ever met when it comes to trying to get her to do things she doesn't want to do. There's just like literally no way of convincing her. She'll just freak the fuck out, like, and just have the most brutal tantrums. And so more recently with food, it's been really difficult with her because over the period of probably about a month, maybe 3 or 4 months, it would have been last year around October, she just stopped eating all the things that she used to love. Like, she used to love chicken, she used to love egg, cheese, bread, all these things that a standard kid would like. And then slowly but surely, over about a month, she just stopped eating all of them. Now, it was just pretty much like only Up and Goes that were chocolate flavored, and we got a special chocolate drink for children that has a lot of nutrition in it that's called Pediasure. And pretty much for like several months, she just had a liquid diet with the odd dry biscuit and all this other stuff.
Wow.
So
yeah,
that's been really interesting with trying to get her to eat other things, like constantly putting them in there or changing them around. And yeah, it's just brutal. But yeah, we went to the dietitian and they're like, you kind of just have to starve her enough to break her so that she'll eat whatever you want. Like, you keep giving her too many options, because we got these mixed messages. The doctor's like, give her whatever the fuck she wants. If she wants ice cream for breakfast, it doesn't matter, because she hasn't put on any weight in 3 months and she needs to start gaining weight again, right? That's not normal. And so we went through a period of just giving her whatever, and she would eat things like ice cream and, obviously. But she would just avoid everything else. She wouldn't have chocolate, fish and chips. She wouldn't eat any of that stuff. Would just be like, ugh, gucky, and only wanted the chocolate drink. But yeah, it's slowly been getting better, and we just have to sort of keep trying to switch things in and out. But the dietitian's like, stick to your 5 meals a day, your breakfast, your morning tea, your lunch and everything, and don't give her any other options outside of that or during that. If you put something out for lunch, that's lunch. If she doesn't have it, she waits till afternoon tea, and you can offer her lunch again, but it's the same thing. It's the plate with what you put on it. And still, I've never broken her. So she's never cracked and just had what was on the plate, because she was still, you can tell she's hungry, but she's more stubborn than she ever gets hungry, which is just insane, because some days you'll just see how hungry she is and she wants other things. But if you tell her, here's your food, she'll just pretty much tell you to go fuck yourself and have the worst tantrum in the world, hit it, throw it on the ground, smash things. It's just insane. And it's so funny. I'm waiting for that day when she finally clicks and realizes, if I eat the food that's been put in front of me, I get the ice cream. So I think we're on the cusp of that at the moment, where Noah gets it. My son, he's 4. He understands it. And he'll be like, all right, I'll eat the freaking veggies so that I can get my ice cream. But Joey, she just, as soon as she hears ice cream or sees it, she's just like, that's all I want. That's all I want. That's all I want. And I'll be like, you just need to have one mouthful of the egg food that you love, that you had in the past. Just have one mouthful. Eat this tiny, tiny little thing. You won't even taste it. Just eat it. Let me win by making you eat this tiny skerrick of your dinner, and then you can have the ice. And still, she'll just flip out. So I'm like, when is the penny going to drop? And she'll be like, oh, I'll make that minor inconvenient sacrifice so that I can have my ice cream.
Yeah, interesting. I've been thinking a lot, and one of the books I was reading, this one here, Charles Handy, The Second Curve, and he touches upon the marshmallow test, which I'm sure you've heard of. It's basically delayed gratification, so that kids who are able to resist eating one marshmallow placed in front of them immediately, they get 2 if they wait 15 minutes. And 15 minutes for a kid with nothing else to do, they're kind of just put in this room with just themselves and the marshmallow. And basically the kids who waited longer, who would get the marshmallow, when looked at later in life, would have these better chances of success, like in terms of happiness, in terms of wealth, all the things that we tend to define with doing well, they would do better. Yeah. And it was one of the strongest kind of correlations, right up there with IQ in terms of success and having a good life and things like that. I was trying to dig deeper into that, because this is definitely one of those studies which I feel might not hold up with the replication crisis, which would have kind of been, could have been debunked and whatnot. It seems to actually have held up all right. But yeah, I definitely hope that, if she has the stubbornness, that's a great thing, but it's got to be kind of used in the right way,
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting too. Like, man, you think, I remember when the kids were first born, like each of them, probably Noah mainly, we were thinking, God, we're just going to mold this human being. Like, we will decide what he's going to become by the way that we treat him, the things that we show him, the experiences that he has. It feels like all of that effectively amounts to fuck all. Like, he is who he is, and his personality is his personality. And it's so frustrating that it feels like you have like no control over that. It's programmed from birth, it feels, because I imagine that there are things that you could do that would mold his personality, like severe abuse, right? Would completely change someone's personality. But it's the same with my daughter. It's like that. Just she's, when you look back at her 6 months ago, a year ago, you're like, oh my God, that personality was there the whole time. Like, she hasn't really kind of learnt this. She's had this kind of stubborn personality that's just manifested itself in different ways as she's been developing. And the same with him, where I think his exposure to adults around him probably allows him to dive deeper into his personality and allow it to manifest a little more what it would be, in front of his. But like, he's a bit of a clown. He's a bit of a class clown. He's always dicking around now and making jokes and blah, blah, kind of like me, right? So, but I think the fact that I am like that quite often gives himself permission. He gives himself permission to do that more frequently, as opposed to, say, trying to hold that under the surface. But it is really interesting just watching the kids as they grow up and realizing how much nature is, I feel, at least, as a biologist and with that sort of training in the background, I feel like nature, the way that they are genetically and biologically, has so much more of a push for their personality in the way that it's going to be than nurture, than what my wife and I do in terms of, the punishment or the experiences or the food that we give them, all of that sort of stuff. It has an effect, but I feel like...
What would you put the ratio at, you reckon?
Oh man, I feel like it's well over, like 70% nature, probably more. Like probably, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe there's studies that have been done on this. I haven't looked into it that deeply, but I think that the main reason that I feel this way is because so many times you're just at a loss for the punishments and the way that you've raised them having zero effect on their behavior. Like just seeing that they just can't help themselves, and then having the self-reflection too. Like, if I psychoanalyze myself a little bit, I was always getting told by my dad, like, Pete, you're being a bully. You stop doing that. You're annoying people. You're annoying your sister. You're annoying me. You're annoying the dog. You're annoying the cat. You're annoying, whoever. You're just being a bully. And it was never me trying to be a nasty person, but I had this thing inside of me of like, I want to kind of see what people's reaction or what the dog's reaction or the cat's reaction is going to be if I do this thing. And I make it sound like it's something horrible, but like, it might be just letting the cat smell my perfume or something. If I put some deodorant on, I'd be like, hey, what does this smell like? Whereas my dad would always be like, why the fuck would you do that? Just leave the cat alone. Whereas I'd be like, I want to see what it's going to do, like I want to see what its reaction. So I would have this thing in my personality where I'm like, I didn't learn that from my dad and I didn't learn it from my mum. Neither of them behave that way. But it's something that I have noticed my entire life. I've always had this kind of like, I wouldn't consider it bullying, but maybe teasing, that kind of clown nature of just kind of stirring the pot a little more than the average person would in a lot of these situations. And so I do that with my kids all the time too, or I'll fuck with them, and not in a nasty kind of way, but like I'll tease them a lot more than my wife would tease them. And, she'll be like, you're bullying them. And I'll be like, oh, I'm getting triggered. Stop it. You sound like my dad. But I'm also self-aware now. And I'm like, I have to kind of control that urge to fuck with my children at times and like limit the extent to which, that they get fucked with so that they don't get traumatized or whatever, like I'll put a little bit of tomato sauce on the plate next to Noah's ice cream or something and be like, try this, it's really good. Just see if he will, and he will, and he'll be like, yeah, it is. And I'll be like, oh God.
Yeah, so, exactly.
I don't know, but anyway, it is really funny to see that when I look back on my life, I'm like, that's been there the entire time since I can remember, as young as I can remember ever, being. And I don't feel like I learnt that. I feel like that was just my nature. And like I have those conversations with my dad where I'm like, it gets so triggering when you do the whole like, don't do that, you're a bully. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be a bully. And I understand, that my behavior is affecting other people or animals negatively, but in a mild kind of way. But I can't really help it. It's kind of just part of my nature, right? Like I just have to be aware of it and try and stop myself from doing it quite often.
Yeah. Well, for me, I was always the people pleaser.
Yeah.
So I think I was actually really great as a kid because it kind of means, adults like you, other kids kind of like you because you play what games they want to play and whatnot. But as I'm getting older, I'm like, damn, this isn't serving me as well as it used to. And so I'm having to be a bit more kind of pushing myself in terms of being like, no, I'm going to be more selfish, even though I kind of hate doing it. It's like, no, I'm going to like, a classic example would be like, going on a date. No, let's do it close to my house. Like it's I just don't have to drive as far, all those sorts of deals. But then I'm chatting with my dad again. I find out some random things, which I was like, whoa, I never would have expected that. There was a age difference of about 5-6 years between me and my brother. And so...
Is he older or younger?
Younger. He's younger than me. And so when I was probably 12, so he was 6. I think that was around the age where my parents would let me babysit him. And so apparently kind of the first night this happened, he sat my brother down and he's like, Prentice, look, you're going to have to do whatever Kyrin says. He's the one in charge here. And my brother's just, at that age, was just a menace, He was just, a menace is probably just the best way to describe it. He wasn't doing experiments to see what would happen. I think he was just doing things and just being silly. And so dad, sat him down and was like, all right, you have to do this. You have to follow everything. And then, what would I have expected from that evening? What would have happened? I was like, we probably just had some fun. We played some games, watched a movie or something, like casual night. No, apparently I absolutely abused the power. I was making him go get sandwiches and, get this from the fridge and like, you're going to do a dance. Like, I think I actually made him dance for me like a monkey or something like that.
I will call you my bitch. Your name, forget your name tonight. You are just my bitch.
Yeah. And I just went, wow, I didn't think I would have had that in me at 12 years old. But
it would be nice to know how many children would have that kind of thing in them, right? At such a young age, especially the first time a child is given a significant amount of power, even if it's something like that over your sibling, you'd like to think, oh, I'd never abuse it. But I feel like even if it's not necessarily in your nature to be a dictator type and controlling and everything, you're probably going to experiment with the fact that you have the power to begin with, right? Like the first time you were given significant amount of power like that, you're probably going to be like, okay, what does it feel like to order someone around, clean the floor? And then afterwards, maybe be like, yeah, now I feel bad. Okay, I won't do that again, or you'll be like, fuck, I'm going to lean into that. That was fun,
Yeah, well, I mean, looking back now, I it's just like maybe that was the one and only time because I hate telling people what to do. Yeah. It's so weird. I'll be in the gym and doing handstands and someone will come up and be like, man, that's really cool. Like, how do you learn how to handstand? And I'll give them some like basic tips, but I don't want to tell them what to do. I'm kind of just like, look, this is the general thing. Coaching people. The one time I kind of got close to maybe looking at being in a leadership position when I worked for Rio Tinto.
Yeah.
Man, I was not. Yeah, I didn't want to be the boss of anyone.
What do you think that is? Is that not wanting the responsibility? Is it not wanting to have to teach other people, to have to be in charge of what their output is and the quality of it? What are the things that go through your head if you can kind of psychoanalyze yourself and think about it? Why are you sort of leaning away from that and not into it?
Definitely in the past, it would have been the responsibility aspect. I used to have
Yeah.
a real aversion to it. I didn't see any of the upsides that you could get from it.
Yeah.
Listening to kind of Jordan Peterson and people like that kind of made me go, yeah, okay, I can kind of see the arguments of why you'd want to lean into it. I think probably a lot of it's just my... unfortunately, it's one again not a super attractive trait, but neuroticism. Like, I definitely overthink things, and it would probably be I'm just unsure enough of myself, of what I know or what reality is, of that conveying that onto other people, and then being responsible for kind of, maybe not responsible for their outcomes, but certainly having a part in whatever happens. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of that, just because so many times in my life I've realized, like, oh, all those things you thought they were wrong, or that wasn't the reason for your success. It was completely, arbitrary, or it was this other thing that was underneath the surface, sort of deal. So I think probably that is the bigger deal now, which is just I'm just unsure.
I think it's good to have that to some degree, but I think you need to kind of, like, not you personally, but in general, like...
Oh, I need more confidence. I definitely need more kind of self-assurance. That's one thing I'm definitely lacking in.
I think it's, as a scientist, it was always really good to have that kind of insecurity, or that kind of, like, I'm not 100% certain of this thing because I likely don't know all the facts, even if I am an expert. I likely haven't tested everything that I should test to be able to make definitive statements. And so that was something that, it was interesting. In the scientific world, you would be kind of expected, or you shaped, and by the time you're doing post-grad work, or you're working as a scientist somewhere, you would have that language always coming out of your mouth of, like,
maybe
clarifying things, using that uncertainty kind of language of it's likely that this is the case, it may be the thing, it appears to be, and people hate it to some degree, but at the same time,
they're called modal verbs, if for those who are interested.
But it is one of those things where I think people, this happened during COVID, they hated scientists not just giving definitive kind of, like, this is the exact thing that everyone needs to do, this is the exact way that it's going to pan out. And the problem with that, and I think this sort of ties in with what happened with Trump, when you do speak in absolutes like that, you do end up getting a crowd, because everyone wants to sort of have a leader that they feel like knows everything. But because in reality, no one knows everything, and those people tend to be massively disingenuous, and they're kind of manipulating the fact that we behave that way, and like to go towards absolutists in order to get a crowd and a supporter base and everything like that. It is really interesting that you kind of have to juggle those two things. And scientists, you would often come across these scientists, and it ties in interestingly too, I think, with women and men in the workplace, whether or not it's science, that often the men will climb up the position hierarchy and end up in these positions of power more frequently than women, because they have, personality wise, they're more likely to be absolutist or very confident in and of themselves and their decisions and everything, which lends itself to becoming a leader or to getting a promotion or whatever, compared to being a lot more uncertain, or lacking the confidence and everything. But it is something that was really interesting as a scientist, because you would come across scientists who would behave that way and they would get really high up, but then you would kind of see that it was a facade and that a lot of their work was bullshit. And you'd be like, I'm astonished that this person's on $200,000 a year at one of the best universities in Australia. And then you listen to how they speak and you're like, oh, okay, that's why. This guy sees himself as a guru, savior kind of complex, and is just infallible. And anyone who speaks out against him just, has to effectively go somewhere else. I think it happened too to some degree during COVID, where some of these leaders like Fauci, it was like anything that he said was gospel. And you were kind of like, that's just not how it works. You shouldn't require or want him to be spouting things that are 100% absolute truths or whatever, and then complain if they're not true later. It's like, you have to kind of get comfortable with the uncertainty in life and in a lot of these things, especially even with your leaders. This is the most annoying thing, I think, with the political system, especially Australia's political system, is that it seems like no one can ever admit making a mistake as a leader. And it's funny because I feel like the population wants our leaders to be fallible, and wants them to own up to their mistakes, but we also don't allow them to recover from mistakes. So you kind of are like, well, this guy's a liar. And it's like, yeah, because if he tells the truth, you're going to be like, well, look what he did. Fuck that guy. He should never work ever again in politics. And it's kind of like you can't do a good job in a position where you can never make a mistake. And I think that only creates liars, right? Because you can never admit fault. You can never admit guilt because you'll end up losing support. So, that's one of the parts of democracy that I really hate. It's the fact that there's no road back from failure or from making mistakes, right? And so you end up selecting for charlatans or liars or people who can't be truthful, who get around the truth all the time, who use the weasel words and, all that sort of stuff. And so you end up with these massively slimy characters, and it's happened pretty much everywhere in the Western democracies, right? We've seen it in the US, in Australia, we've seen it in Canada, we've seen it in the UK, with all the different leaders that end up in power. And you just sort of like, but that's unfortunately what the population is selecting for.
Yeah. It's I think that's one of just so many books on governance and democracy and stuff all kind of get to that as well, which is just being able to find out the truth, because there's so much in place which is designed for the truth not to kind of come out. And then just all the mixed incentives. One of the things that kind of made me disillusioned with university was two experiences. One was the thesis that I had to do as part of my engineering degree. That was always kind of like the big looming thing. Like, this has to be, immaculate. This is where you should kind of show your stuff as a student. This is the big thing. And man, I feel like I was just half baking it. I put in work. There was no doubt I put in a bunch of work, but I was cherry picking data. And I could kind of see myself doing it, but it was like, well, I don't even know how to write this correctly. And the stuff that I need doesn't exist, or I can't get at it. And so I kind of have to use what I've got. And it was all about mine seals and how to seal up mines once they've underground mines once they've been finished. And you'd think you'd just put a big board of planks across it in the old style, like Wild West movies and shit like that. But no, you have to it's full like concreting and all these sort of things. But
is it just the first part of the entrance to that area of the mine that gets sealed, or do you end up like having to fill up the entire thing?
No, sometimes you'll put in a series of kind of walls. Now, usually it's not to prevent entrance from people. It's actually to prevent in the event of an explosion of pent up gases and stuff. So this is particularly applicable for coal mines, to not have things exploding out of the ground, sort of deal. So they'll have multiple seals or barriers, and then also for water and whatnot, to not have water which is kind of built up in the mine over time, because it's in the groundwater and whatnot, rises up. Then you'll have just all this tainted water and whatnot, which can make its way into the creeks, environmental damage and stuff like that. So it's also those are the main two ones, to contain water and to prevent explosions. But yeah, usually it's kind of one big seal, but you can have multiples. But once again, I felt like it was a half-baked work. I got really good grades for it. So I was like, well, I mean, the thesis isn't all what I thought it would be. And then going back a couple of years later as a tutor, I tutored one of the courses, a second year course. And all I had to do was basically it was super simple. Here's this program. I'm going to do a series of tutorials on it. If you come to all 6 of them, you will have everything that you need to do this report, all the pictures and whatnot. And I will even tell you how to explain this picture in the tutorials. And I made it just super clear, presentation's really important, whatnot. And I got all these reports in, and just some of them are so bad. They put these tiny little pictures in. I'm like, come on, just make sure. You can tell that they're doing it to save on money for printing or things like that and whatnot. And just some of them were obviously just so crap. And, I was grading them. I thought I graded them strictly to the criteria. And some people, a fair few of them, I put as subpar, that they didn't actually do the work. gave this all into the kind of course coordinator and whatnot. And he was looking through them, and he's just like, oh no, yeah, we can't have this. Basically, like, I had to shift all the grades up so that no one failed. And once again,
well, that's the trouble, I think, with a lot of universities where they rely on full fee paying students, right? And you can't, if you keep failing students, they're not going to keep coming back, right? Or they're going to just be like, oh, fuck this place. I'll go somewhere that'll just pass me all the time. Forgive me, I put a lozenge in because I've been sick recently and my voice, I want my voice to hold up. So forgive me if you can hear me with a lozenge.
Some clicking and whatnot. That's all right. One used to chew gum in the podcast all the time, so people are used to it. And I've noticed I have this kind of clicking thing I do every now and then. I know.
Oh man, you get so sensitive to that once you start editing podcasts and the way that your mouth will open up and make clicking sounds and all sorts of other stuff. No one else will probably ever hear it because they're just so used to hearing it all the time when speaking to people. But when you listen to your own stuff over again, it's just like, oh, this is painful. Or the number of times you use the same language, phrases, ums and ahs, everything like that. Yeah, whatnot.
Yeah, we all have our little ones, don't we? I was going to transition into you were talking about how men can kind of reach the top of the workforce and whatnot, and I'm sure you've seen there's so much crazy stuff where it's, if you're the amount of CEOs who are more than 6 foot or 6'3" is ridiculous. It's not representative of the population. So there's something also about genetics and height where it's just, wow, that's they must know a lot of things. They're so tall.
Have you listened to, sorry to interrupt you, I feel like I know where you're going with this, but have you listened to the podcast Decoding the Gurus?
No, I haven't.
It's really good. They effectively go through, they try to be non-partisan, right? So where they take people from the left and the right and they look into effectively their language, the language they use.
So politicians in particular?
No, usually people like Eric Weinstein or Joe Rogan or Elon Musk, Ibrahim X. Kendi, whatever his name is, the guy who did the white-related books about, the white race or whatever, being oppressors. And it's really interesting because they're both, I think they're psychologists or anthropologists, and they kind of analyze the way in which these people are behaving, the language they use in order to convince people that they are correct about things or to keep themselves in a leader kind of position. And it is just really interesting when they break these things down, because there is so much sort of persuasive language you can use, even if you don't necessarily have the facts on your side, to convince people of your point of view. Ad hominems are a sort of example, right, where you would just call the other person an idiot or something. Trump is a good example of using constant ad hominems that make, effectively attacking the person's character or appearance or whatever, where it really has nothing to do with whether or not the other person is correct about something or whatever, but it has the effect of convincing the audience that the other person is, or undermining the other person's credibility. And so this podcast is really good because they go through people like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and everything and kind of analyze how he speaks and the language that they use, but then also the kind of talking points that they center around frequently. And they'll take interviews and sort of focus on a single interview and then break it down. And the results are often surprising. But it was one of those things, where you were talking about CEOs and how many of them end up, say, 6 foot tall. And they probably, if you were to sort of break them all down, there would probably be a higher level of narcissism and, bullshittery and overconfidence and everything like that. And Elon Musk is one of those examples where it was really funny. I went through that kind of, that phase of thinking this guy's a genius. He's going to get us to Mars. He's so brilliant. And then the more and more I dig into him and try and learn about him, it's more I just feel like this guy's so full of shit and just so good at convincing the world that he's a fucking genius, right? And it is really interesting. They break him down, and there are some of these. He gives these examples all the time in his interviews where he posts himself up as this genius who goes in and considers a problem that his entire team had with a rocket or something. And his, lack of he never finished his degree in engineering, but because he's read a book, he goes in and he's just like, have you guys just thought about changing this one component to this? And bam, the problem's fucking solved. And, it's all, he just had this, he just came in, looked at everything and was like, just try this one thing. And, the 30 different engineer geniuses that work on the project were just like, wow, this guy's amazing. The number of stories that he tells like that about, SpaceX, about Tesla, about Twitter, it's just bullshit. And it is really funny hearing this when they break his language down about how much of it is just like him making sure that he maintains his position that he maintains as a CEO and as this leader, but also boosting the share prices of all of his businesses. He does it with Tesla. We're a year away from being able to drive across the country in a car without having to control the car or whatever. And when you look into those predictions, we've been a year away for the last 8 years, and he just keeps doing that because he doesn't want the share price to sort of fall out of Tesla's ass. And so, I don't know, but it is one of those things where the more you look into characters like that, it is so funny when you're like, oh, they're a bullshit artist. And that's how, but it is funny how you'll have all these other really smart people following leaders like that and latching onto it and being convinced of this person, kind of like when you had those, back in the day, you had those religious charlatans go into certain towns and then end up creating a cult or whatever because they were just so good at convincing people that they were the Messiah or that they were this amazing leader. And so, yeah, I don't know. Decoding the Gurus, it's a really good podcast for kind of becoming a lot more self-aware, but also aware of other people and that language that's being used. And I notice now when I'm talking to people, I'll notice, am I imprinting upon the language that I'm using in order to kind of bias it? Like, am I using certain language to try and win the argument or win my point without necessarily having any evidence to back it up? And you can start to notice when other people, I love my dad to pieces, but some of the language that he uses when having, you'll hear this if you ever listen to my podcast and the Goss, the language that he will use sometimes is very, very, very heavy in convincing you that he is correct, whether or not he is actually correct. And he may be correct, but he's not necessarily laying out the correctness objectively. He's using a lot of this kind of like putting his hand on one side of the scale language to convince other people that he's correct. And loads of people do that. And you'll see CEOs, leaders in any area will tend to have that kind of effect. And sometimes they're right, even if it's kind of like it's a means to an end or an end to a means, whichever way around it is. Sometimes they are right, but they use that as a way of subconsciously kind of just speeding up the process of you getting on board.
Yeah.
Anyway,
which
kind of a
tends to
rant.
lead to bad things. It's for the greater good type of deal. I just finished reading Animal Farm again. And yeah. It's always scary to go back and see like, wow, we managed to kill a whole lot of people in the 20th century
over nothing.
Doing that. Yeah. Have you ever particularly fallen for anyone? Is there a
100%.
style?
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
But he's an interesting one because I actually really did. I love that guy initially, but he has had such a sort of fall from grace. And again, it's probably going to piss off a lot of your listeners, but just have a listen to the way that he talks now compared to 5 years ago, right? He seems to be a lot more bitter and angry and resentful of the world and of people around him. And it's one of these interesting things where you're kind of like, Jordan, I need you to go back and listen to yourself and take your own advice from when you were a lot happier. Like, make your bed, dude. He's one of them. He's not that bad. And I still feel like he comes from a good place and he's not trying to do harm and he's not trying to necessarily intentionally mislead people. But I feel like he kind of lacks that self-awareness in terms of the language he uses and his own kind of biases. It would be, again, I don't know the guy personally, but I feel like that's the case. Having watched him from pretty much the start, I remember I subscribed to his YouTube channel when it was, bugger all subscribers, under 100,000 or something. And then he blew up and I was just like, wow. But I love those original lectures.
There's like the 2017 period. That was when I was starting to listen to him as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, Brett Weinstein was another one. He got me in because he was a biologist. But again, you go through Decoding the Gurus. It's a good podcast because they do really lay out how full of shit some of these people are that you can't necessarily get. You'll listen to a podcast and or a conversation or an interview or watch a documentary with these people, and when it's not being checked, when what they're saying isn't being checked, fact checked, you can't really do it in real time a lot of the time with these people. Same with Trump, same with, they seem convincing, right? You just listen to Trump talk, and if you were to not look up anything, he seems like a convincing kind of guy because he's so fucking confident. Everything that he says, these Mexicans are coming across the border and raping our women. The way it's 100% true. This is definitely taking, I have the information, like the stuff that they use in order to convince you that this person's correct. And once you become aware of it, you hear people doing it all the time and you'll be like, wait a second, they haven't actually stated how they know that to be true or what evidence they have for that. They're just using language that's trying to convince me. And yeah, Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's a massive one now. I can't listen to any of his shit anymore because I just looked into the criticisms of him and his talking points. And although, I don't think he comes from a bad point of view. I don't think he's a bad person, but he's so biased and so unaware of his biases, especially with conspiracy theories, that the thing that kind of poisoned the well for me was COVID and his ivermectin shit and just not looking into the science at all and the number of people that he had on that supported it versus the actual scientists who were virologists or doctors or whatever coming on and actually laying out the real information. The amount of bullshit that he spread during that period really irked me and kind of meant that I just don't trust him with any of the experts, so-called experts that he gets on now, because I'm like, well, you had a whole bunch on that were shown to be complete charlatans and absolutely full of shit when it came to ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, all of that shit that was meant to be, saving people against COVID, the anti-vaccine stance that he had. And it was like, you really just had to dig a little deeper and talk to the experts and look into the science behind the different things that you were supporting, like the ivermectin thing. Again, same with Brett Weinstein. There's just the studies that were actually done are complete garbage. Some of them have been retracted, and the experts that they would have on would be touting these studies, and you're like, they've been retracted. You can't just keep talking. This shit, the scientists who published this thing and the journals have now agreed that it was done erroneously and it's been retracted. It's not published anymore. It's been shown that it was bullshit. And you keep saying this study was done in 1999 on this thing, and it still proves our point. And it's like, you can't just keep doing that publicly and get away with it. And so, yeah, there are a lot of those kinds of people where it's not so much that I'm contemptuous of them. I think they're pieces of shit. But I feel like a lot, and that's the hard part. A lot of these people are, I would say, good people, but they behave and believe in certain things and are very unaware of their rhetoric that they use, the thought processes, the sense making that they use, that it leads to bad outcomes. So it is one of those things with Joe Rogan. It's kind of like, as much as you can always just say, I'm just a bro, asking questions and trying to have interesting conversations. It's like your podcast gets downloaded billions of times a year. People are listening to the experts that you get on your podcast and making quote unquote informed decisions based on the experts that you have on here. So if you're getting on and talking about ivermectin being the end all be all of, not dying from COVID, you're going to have a significant portion of your listenership making decisions based on that will end up, ending their lives. Like you have such a big audience now that if you say, just drink car battery acid and you'll get, big and strong like me, some asshole's going to do that and die. Like some moron is going to be listening. Someone out there, whether or not you think they deserve it because they're idiots, that's obviously an extreme example of drink battery acid and you'll be big and buff. But
Liver King's probably a real example of that.
Yeah, exactly. I know, exactly. So that sort of thing really irks me, and it's something that I wish more people would get rewarded for, being uncertain, and that there was a mechanism for supporting that kind of language that was used when talking about a lot of these topics. And it was really interesting watching all of this during COVID and just how much experts often got shat on or didn't get followed or, weren't listened to anywhere near as much as the charlatans that were up there saying the exact, you just have to not have 5G on your phone and you won't get COVID, like that kind of crap that just spread like wildfire. It was just amazing. And then not only that, but like after the vaccines are developed and used and COVID effectively becomes, just a standard cold now. I mean, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but you know what I mean. No one is kind of like, oh, we were wrong. Like ivermectin wasn't the savior. The vaccines actually did work. So yeah, I don't know that side of society and those people it just frustrates me. And I know that we're all kind of like that to some degree, but having that self-awareness and constantly thinking about how you're talking about certain topics, why you're certain of certain things, why you shouldn't be, how other people are talking about it, I think it only helps to at least take a step back and be kind of mindful of those things and be like a little more skeptical, right, of yourself, your own beliefs, but also those of others, right?
What I've noticed is I'm tending to try and just kind of diversify where I get the knowledge from. So if it's a topic I'm really passionate about, Bitcoin, for example, is probably the biggest one over the last couple of years, and I'll chat more with you about that soon. But
I got to look up the rate. What's it about $40,000? So it's bounced back.
Yeah, in Australian. But I'll try and listen to like a broad spectrum of them, of podcasts or information sources, because I was very similar. I would get stuck on one person or one thing. Pretty much all the same people you mentioned. I was kind of avid consumers of what they did and what they produced, and then part of that's just me changing. Part of that's the platform. One of the great things about Joe Rogan when he was on YouTube was the comment section. Man, that was such a great source of information, because he would get people on who, I remember there was this one guy, bald guy, who was just like, had these kind of sunken in eyes. Like you could see it was almost like it, just drug use over probably a long time. And he was basically talking about, how the police, all these like negative things that were happening to him in his life. It's like one tragedy after another. Like, he's finally getting his life together, and then bam, he gets falsely arrested and whatnot. And it was kind of like a sad sob story, and you're like, oh man, this poor guy. And then, a lot of the top comments were, I've met people like this, and there is never a taking of responsibility of any of their actions. There is always this thing. And I was kind of trapped into just watching it and listening to it. It was like, oh man, that really sucks. There's a lot of injustice in this world. And then it's like, yeah, but just a, little reminder here.
Yeah.
There probably a lot of his action of this were his own actions and his own choosings as well. So
not only that, but like, this is 100% subjective retelling of these stories.
It's very one-sided. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the hub. I have a friend at the moment who's going through a divorce, and I've been chatting with him a lot. He's one of my best friends prior to this, about his relationship with his wife. And I have to constantly be reminding myself, he's my best friend. I love this guy, but I'm only hearing his side of the story. And like, he'll be telling me things where I'm like, I can tell he wants me to be like, yeah, your wife's a cunt. She's a horrible human being. But at the same time, I have to be like, I have no idea. Like, as easy as it would be for me to just be like, yeah, fuck her, oh yeah, I'm on your side, bro, 100%. I want to be there. I'm supportive of you, but at the same time, I have zero awareness of the situation objectively and her side of the story. So I'm not going to try and, just end up on that one side, just touting, you're the best and the other person sucks, and, do everything to fuck her over you can and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you just, I have to be as objective as I can, so that hopefully whatever ends up happening with them, it's the best for everyone involved, including the kids. So, yeah,
toughie. Well, that's also why when I try and convince people of things, and I hate the should word. The should word is probably that's kind of my lead in terms of like bullshit,
turning off
bullshit. Yeah, a little bit. If I'm listening to someone and they say should a lot, that typically brings it into my own conscious thought really quickly.
My dad gets triggered by that so much.
Yeah.
His mum used to be on him all the time. You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And so he's like, anytime someone tells me that, I do the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm like, so everyone's been telling you to be a nice person, huh, Dad? You should be. You should be a really nice person. Fuck you.
Nice. But yeah, that's one where of course I have my own opinions, and if it's a friend and getting into some sort of relationship or something, I typically don't try and convince with in a really strong way. It's usually a subtle way of me telling a story of how I did something similar, and usually I try and make it a personal one as well, because it's something I can be confident of. With the opposite being, a friend of a friend had this happen to him. Was like, wow.
It sounds like you'd be a really good psychologist or psychiatrist, right? Where,
Dude,
how does that make you feel?
Engineer, so.
How does that make you feel? Have you thought about this?
I think I actually would be, because in group settings I suck. One-on-one, that's always kind of been the way I have communicated best, and it's always been because I'm usually better at asking questions and then listening, rather than kind of the classic Jordan Peterson. Like I already know what I know, so I kind of want to know what you know. And obviously,
a lot of the time, what's important is just talking about it and thinking about it and becoming aware of it, right? Like, even though it is really one of those funny things where, even though you may experience things personally, you don't necessarily spend time in your head considering them, right? And so when someone's there trying to just ask you questions about your experience or your thoughts or your feelings or your whatever it is, and you have to say them out loud, it's sort of forcing you to reflect on those things, hopefully in a sort of a closer to objective way, than just your subjective experience. But it is such a difficult thing to train, right? Especially on your own. And
I used to keep a journal, which I would write a lot of stuff in. And since doing the podcast, that's basically now just become, a monthly thing, where it used to be daily or at the very least weekly. And it's kind of just condensed down to, this month I did, blah, 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 just general rough keeping of what has been going on in my life. And I think a large portion of that is just, now I can do it via the podcast form, and I'm mostly talking about topics which I'm comfortable with, I suppose. There's only a couple of things which I don't really talk about on the podcast, and that's been a pretty good outlet for.
What are those?
I can generally say one is kind of like sex stuff. Neither one nor I are particularly interested in talking about that, but also intimate details and things like that. And then personal stuff with friends and family, I'll use stories, but I'm usually trying to use ones which I already know have been spoken about in a public way. It's just so I
leave all those skeletons in the closets.
I don't want to accidentally make people mad or angry or embarrassed or any of the other different things. You took us on this tangent. It wasn't actually where I was going to go with the 6 foot
my
person,
apologies.
but it was good. The other thing is, sometimes you meet people who are kind of destined to be a thing, just simply because of the most random thing, with this being their name. So you sent me a link to this really fascinating conversation called "A Warning on the Future of Music" with author Ted Gioia, Gioia. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. And the guy who was interviewing him was called Rick Beato, and he was kind of a musician. And I'm like, his fucking last name is Beato, like it's beat. He couldn't have done anything else. Of course, he's going to be a musician. He's destined to be that. But it was a really fascinating one, because it was talking about the music industry and kind of where it is and whatnot. Why'd you send me this? I'm actually really interested how you found this out.
What do you mean? How I found what out? That you'd be interested in it? Or
no, more like that you were interested in it. Why?
Oh, okay. So you probably know me by now and how I sort of go down rabbit holes and get new passions. I got back into guitar recently.
I was going to say, you seem like the type of person who would have been in a band at some point.
I was a singer and a musician,
I think you might have told me that,
I think one of the things that sort of stopped me from being going further with music, at least singing, is the fact that for whatever reason, I seem to be much more susceptible to these kinds of throat infections where I lose my voice. I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm like, I wonder if music selects for people who are much less likely, like singers, much less likely to get throat and nose infections through, rhinoviruses or whatever, where they lose their voice. Because I would imagine if you're touring, if I had a tour and I was touring America right now, for the last 2 weeks, I haven't been able to talk properly. I've had a voice like this and I can't sing for shit. So, but you never really hear about singer X had to cancel 2 weeks worth of shows for their band because of a cold. So yeah, I always wonder, I'm like, if you were to do a scientific test and look at their susceptibility to certain viruses, I wonder if there would be a selective pressure there of singers not being as susceptible to these kinds of viruses as the rest of the population.
Case study of one, but my mum's a very, very good singer. She headed up the barbershop choir here in Brisbane she's director for like 20 something years.
Wow.
And yeah, I can't really remember her being sick, even though she also worked as a high school teacher. And so I was surrounded by like sick kids all the time. So yeah, I think case study of one, but yeah.
Yeah, it would be cool to know the answer to that. It was something I was always jealous of too with other musicians in the band or bands. And the fact that it was like, you can be sick, I could be sick like this. And if I'm a singer, I show up to practice and I can't sing for shit, right? Like I can't hold a note properly because my vocal cords are inflamed or whatever. I can't breathe properly. Whereas I could play guitar just fine, effectively. Maybe it would take me from 100% to 98% or 97% where you're feeling a little tired or something. But you don't have this kind of like, you're not making the music as sort of organically, using an organ like your throat and your nose and your mouth and everything. So I used to get so jealous of the other musicians because they just be like, what the fuck's the problem, dude? Just sing. Be like, yeah, I know. I wish I could just like, oh. But yeah, whereas, guitar, drums, everything like that, I think you could probably be sicker and still be able to gig than a singer. But yeah, I got into guitar. It's really funny too. I was sort of analyzing, why the fuck did I just suddenly get into this thing again? And I was listening to a band. I've actually got a thing here of them. Polyphia, right? I don't know if you've heard of them. They're really, really cool.
No.
It's an instrumental band, and the guitar, they're all freaks. They're all real freaks. But obviously, if you're in an instrumental band, you're probably a good musician. But it's just really guitar kind of heavy, but it's really, really interesting and advanced. And I was just like, I listened to a few of their songs and was like, this is cool. Started listening for about a week and was like, fuck, I really want to pick up the guitar again. And not necessarily ever be able to master these songs because they're definitely way out of my ballpark. But just get back into self-expression through music. And it's a lot easier, I think, to do something like guitar than sing when you have small children in the house as well. Like I can sit in the background humming, but it's just not the same. I don't know. There's a certain feel to having an instrument, holding an instrument. That was the other thing that I think, as you probably are aware now, I'm sort of a collector kind of person where I like to be thinking about gear or objects and getting a set, comparing them, showing other people, trying them out, and so I did this with like photography. I did this with plants, as we talked about previously. I did it growing up. I used to love Pokemon, games on PlayStation, everything like that. And you'd have to have all these different ones to be able to try. But I think guitar kind of lends itself to that because there are so many different types out there. There's so many different genres of music. It's just endless in terms of trying to learn and master and understand all these different things. And so, yeah, once I picked up the guitar again and was like, I'm trying to remember all these things and playing scales and chords, I was like going down that rabbit hole of different YouTubers now, which I didn't have when I was first a guitarist at, the age of 14, 15, whatever it was. And there are just endless channels now of people who are good guitarists, who will teach you, who have their own courses, who break down music, who look at gear. And it's just so much more of an interesting hobby, I feel, now. And so that was how I ended up finding Rick Beato. He was a guitarist in a band called Billionaire, I think, back in the 90s, but then became a producer. And he has turned that into a YouTube channel where the guy's just a freak musician and just a really likable dude. So he produces albums for people, at least did back until I think about 2016. But he was saying in one of his videos, if they don't nail the part in 2 takes, I'll do it. So he was like, I'm always just like, I have no patience for this shit. And so he could just sit down and just smash it out. And but yeah, he has really interesting videos where he'll teach you music theory, he'll break down songs, he'll have discussions about guitars from the 60s, amps, all that sort of stuff. So I got down that rabbit hole and I came across this interview where he was chatting to one of his friends. It may not have been a friend, but a guy in the music world. And I think they were talking about AI now just entering the music realm, and whether or not, if AI would make music, will we still listen to it, and what are the sort of like repercussions? I think in that interview they showed, was it that interview where they showed Drake and some of his AI songs that people had made using his voice and his beats?
Oh, they might have.
I can't remember, but I think they had that kind of chat. Right,
it was related to the incentives. Yeah, the more of it was related to how the music industry actually works. How the Spotify charts are getting gamed, for example, where if you type in jazz, a lot of them are these Swedish people who Spotify have paid, and Spotify being a Swedish company, all these playlists are dominated by these Swedish musicians, and there's just
Spotify earn more money
incentives.
as a result.
Correct.
Yep.
And so it's not like the best music; it is the best music that makes money for Spotify. And then just the standard stuff, the small creators barely getting anything. The large ones only when you get to a certain size do you actually make money from being on Spotify, because people pay a premium subscription for Spotify. That money doesn't go to isn't divided up into who you listen to. So if you listen to only indie artists, almost none of your money is actually going to them. It's all going to who is getting paid, who is being listened to most overall. The Taylor Swifts, the Justin Biebers, the pop musicians who are top of the charts. And so basically all the money goes to them, and only, tiny cents in a couple of thousand plays goes to every other musician.
Yeah, I wonder what it compares to with just YouTube ad revenue. I feel like I'd probably be making more money from YouTube ad revenue than the average indie band.
I would say you probably would. And then this is why there's this really weird stuff like vinyls coming back. Like the stupidest, oldest technology for listening to music, but it solves some of the problems related to the distribution, to kind of the people who are actually creating the music actually getting paid. Generally, it's like I never knew royalties were only 10% for musicians. What? What?
Yeah, well, that's why the labels, effectively make everything. Really, they're the biggest chunk of the pizza, right, or piece of the pizza there. But yeah, it is really interesting with vinyl. But I think it's just so much more of an experience. It's so funny. Like this again, it's a massive tangent, but Japanese people blow my mind. I swear they have like the most intricate ways of doing things, creating things, and it'll be anything. One that blew my mind the other day, right? I couldn't believe this shit. It came up in my Facebook feed and I was like, I gotta watch this. So there's like an entire hobby in Japan where people get tiny fishing rods and they go out, and the aim of the game is to catch the smallest possible fish, right? Only Japanese people could come up with it. But there is a career, a job where someone has to create those fishing rods. This is someone's job. And he takes it very seriously, as I think most Japanese craftsmen do with whatever it is, and spends hours upon hours making really, really, really fucking small fishing rods out of bamboo.
How small are we talking?
Like half the size of a skewer, right? The size of a pen would be the size of the fishing rod, but it functions like a fishing rod, right? So you just sort of like, what the fuck? So anyway, the video showed this guy making this thing, and you just sitting there just like, is this just a model or something? Initially, I was like, this guy just makes this and then sells it to people to like look at. And then no, there's a guy who goes and puts his fishing rod together and like it extends, and he goes out and then he sits in a rice paddy field or whatever with the ditches that have water in them and tries to catch small fish. And the fish, if the fish is like bigger than 2 centimeters, it's a fail, right? He considers that there's a certain species of fish. It's like mosquito fish in Australia, right? That invasive species that's fucking tiny that eats mosquito larvae. And he catches one on the end and he's just like, fucking nailed it. And he's like, tap out for the day. Got my fish. It lets it go. He lets them all go and then just walks home. And so it is, I can't remember where this story was going. I had a reason to tell this story, but it is just so funny how the Japanese as a culture seem to venerate the process, the method, the meticulous nature of creation. But also then there's the creation side of it. So creating the object or the thing or the, and then there's the other side of it, which is the use of it, the enjoyment of it, and often it's to no ends, right? In and of itself is the ends, right? The whole point, he's not catching these fish to live. He's not catching these fish to sell. He's catching the fish because it's something to do. It's like the why do dogs lick their balls? Because they can. And he goes out and he catches these fucking fish, lets them go, and that's it. And it's kind of like he's just meditating, right? He's just in the zone. It's just another way that a human being can get into the zone. My mum does puzzles. That's her version of it. This guy fishes for tiny fucking fish. I can't remember where I was taking this story, but it's worth sharing anyway.
Yeah, it was, so I've traveled extensively around Latin America, and I hit Japan on my way home, as you do. And
in Latin America?
Yeah.
You might have been in the wrong place.
It actually made economic sense and, sense for me to catch up with friends to actually go from Argentina through to Japan and then back to Australia. It actually didn't end up costing me any more than just going a more direct route. But that certainly is one of the places where I was just go like, wow, this is the most bizarrest, coolest, weirdest place. And I could just never see myself fitting in there. And there's a common thing, there's Japanese people who were raised in Japan. They speak the language fluently. They're perfect, on every single thing. But because their dad or their mom was from a different place, they're not, purebred Japanese. Mm-hmm. They're still not really Japanese. And that's just insane to me.
Well, I think it's countries that don't define themselves on migration, right? That migration isn't common there for whatever reason, whether it's intentional or not. It becomes a thing where, it does blow my mind that you can have that happen racially in countries like Japan, and not only is it kind of accepted by Japanese people, but the rest of the world does too. You're like, yeah, you're not fucking Japanese. But I've lived there my whole life. You're white, dude. You're not Japanese. You're like, I have a Japanese passport. I live there. I speak the language. I've grew up there. I've never been anywhere else. No. Whereas, if you were to say that about someone who, say, came from, I don't know, their parents are Sudanese and they grew up in Australia, and you said to them, no, you're not fucking Australian, mate. You would be taken off, to jail. You would be lynched for that. So I don't know, those things. Same with China, similar to that. I think China's probably worse than Japan, where there seems to be a lot more overt racism there. It's really interesting. Like, there's an ad that I've seen where there's a black guy standing in front of a washing machine, and this Chinese chick comes in and he's like, hey, trying to come onto her, and she pushes him into the washing machine and turns it on. And then he comes out a white Asian guy, and she's like, ooh, finally, and then kisses him and hooks up with him and you're just like, I can't believe that was an ad that was shown on TV. Can you believe that shit? And Chinese people would just be like, of course it was. Like, what do you mean? That's not racist. That's just funny. Or it's just an ad. And you're like,
I guess I'm Chinese.
You can't do that, dude. Like, what? I can't imagine the uproar if you did that in Australia. Imagine that. You had a Chinese person standing in front of a washer, and you pushed them in and they came out, Caucasian. Be like, you get lynched. You get lynched. Your company would fail.
Yeah, there are a couple of ads though I've seen of old Aussie ads from, even just the 2000s, and it's like, oh man, you can't get away with that. Yeah.
And they're probably like what, a third as bad as that.
Oh yeah, no, nowhere even close, not even comparable.
What were we talking about prior to the Japanese example? Yeah.
So here's something, and this is related to why I'm so interested in Bitcoin. So with the way that the way that I do the podcast now and with Juan is basically we ask for listener support. So people to support the show by sending in, helping out, sharing and doing all that sort of stuff. The kind of non-monetary support is always really, really
come over
really
and do
much
my laundry.
Yeah. yeah. Who knows? I mean, like, I've got my Chuck's Cloth beanie on, so just come here. I'll chuck the beanie to you, and you can start wiping floors and whatnot. Yeah, too easy. But basically, we ask that they use one of these new apps where you can support within the actual app itself, because it makes so much more sense, and you're not locking in.
Pun intended.
Yeah. And it's not being locked into one application in particular. There's like 5-7 different ones where you can do this, and so it's not like we're trying to promote you going to this next one thing. This is going to be the latest greatest, and it goes nowhere, and then you're like, shit, that, which happens all the time. And I'm sure you get this all the time, emails and stuff of people saying like, oh, check out this app, we've got all these cool features and whatnot.
Just tap
and
out.
it's just that one thing, and it's like, well, I could spend all my time on this, and in a year's time you're not going to be around. It's like there's no point. And one of the cool things is you can do splits in this. So for this show, I've got it set up so a lot of the developers who create these apps, I want to help support them. So I've put them in a 1%. And I'm going to try and convince you to create a little wallet, which will take 5 minutes of your time. And you'll get 30, I'm putting 30% for guests that I come on to do that. And so you'll get 30% of whatever people send in whilst they are listening to this. There's some really interesting things where, okay, because this is like this digital money, how would you ever do that with fiat? If PayPal, or it's doable, but it's never been done, I suppose. Like, there's no micropayments. It's always kind of coming down this micropayments, and you've never been able to do it on the internet. And one of the really cool things happening is there's musicians who are starting to realize like, oh, this might actually work well with music. If I own the rights to the music, I can just create an RSS feed. I can put in splits for the drummer, the bass player, the person who produced it, financiers who help support us, whatnot. And you can, divide this up into essentially royalty payments. And then you just ask people who are listening via Spotify and whatnot, maybe just try going over to this, and it wouldn't be a podcasting app. It'd probably be a new listening app application to go there and just stream in micropayments. And in that way, if you're paying for Spotify Premium and whatnot, instead of that money all going to Taylor Swift, 90% of it or 100% of it really goes to the artist that you're actually trying to support. So yeah, it's kind of been touching upon something that's bubbling under the surface in some of the communities and whatnot that I've been listening to. Does that make any sense to you? Would that be something that you think would work? Or
it's hard. I kind of stay away from any of the Bitcoin related stuff completely, to be honest. I'm so sort of disenfranchised with it all. And I hear of so many of these rug pull things that take place that I'm just like, I just want to stay clear of this. So that's one of the reasons that I haven't gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole.
I get it, man. I completely steered clear of anything COVID related. When COVID was happening, I did not care about ivermectin. I didn't care about the vaccine. I didn't want to hear a single word of it. So I totally get just passing on on certain things for whatever reason. Yeah,
that's it. It is one of those things where I'm like, if I don't get involved, I'm never going to convince anyone else to end up accidentally getting bankrupt from my spread. It's really interesting. One of those things, like I watch from the sidelines. Don't get me wrong, but I just what was it? Was it FTX? Was that the one that went under recently for like $19 billion, and that Sam Bankman-Fried or whatever's gone to jail? And one of the interesting things was just how many creators were getting paid exorbitant amounts of money from him or from the company to spruik his shit, and how many of their followers lost shitloads of money as a result. And so after it went bankrupt, you had all of these huge, and they were like, oh, well, we didn't actually, partner with them or anything. Like,
do your own research.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, you slimy fucks, like that's so, that's one of those things too, where I've never really been able to ethically promote anything on my channel and get paid for it. Because 99 times out of 100, it's something I don't use. something that I don't give a shit about, and something that if I hear about it and I like it, I'm happy to do it for free, effectively, because then it's like, I'm not biased. I'm just telling you that, like, learning languages, I used Duolingo when I first started learning French and Portuguese, and I liked it. Yep. I'm not getting paid to say that. Go use Duolingo if you want to give it a go. Try it. And I feel like that sort of stuff comes across a lot more genuine. But the amount of people that I see that you'll be watching someone's channel and then all of a sudden they're selling you fucking mattresses, and you're just like, everyone sleeps on a mattress. You got to try this new mattress. This mattress is like this and it's like this. And since I've gotten this mattress, it's changed my fucking life.
Sleep technology.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh my God, dude. Like the amount, it's funny how much that can, like, I feel like, undermine your brand at times, because you could just be spruiking the most random shit that has nothing to do with anything. Like, because it is just like this KFC, eat a KFC. Everyone likes KFC, try KFC. And I don't know. So that stuff really irritates me. But it irritates me, when you have things like the whole Bitcoin thing, where you're like, this is actually beyond just getting paid to, say, advertise a mattress. You're advertising something that people invest money in, especially those channels that do, if you want to make money on YouTube, significant amounts of money, like tens of thousands of dollars a day, create a channel that does financial advice effectively, or it does financial advice without it being financial advice, right? So you give that little disclaimer at the start of, I'm not a financial advisor, but, and these channels make so fucking much money because the people who pay to advertise on those channels all advertise bullshit products that convince people they're going to get rich quick. And they make shitloads through ad revenue. Like, I make maybe $1 per 1,000 views. They would be making something like $30 per 1,000 views. Yeah. So it's ridiculous.
Well, that's what I really admire about your, like, everything you've created with Aussie English as well, which is that you create the kind of business around it as well. You're creating something that is 100% vouched for because you fucking created it.
Yeah.
And so, the product is 100% just based on you and not, this is why, another reason why I'm kind of anti-advertising as a whole. I was chatting with my dad and brother about this the other day, and I probably need to clarify a little bit. I'm not against advertising in the sense of people wanting to let other people know about their products. So if you create something, how else is it going to get out there in today's day and age? Word of mouth is still the strongest and probably best thing, but that takes ages. And if you're willing to pay money for other people to see it, I think that's awesome. The problem then is that money never goes to the people who are actually seeing it. So if you think of, like, all the social media, all of the podcast consumers and whatnot, all of that money is kind of going to this middleman. So if I was getting
the creator, right,
and the creator, but it's never really going to the person actually consuming the content, which I think is. I think that's going to be the future, where a lot of it will be like, you get paid to watch this ad. It sort of just makes sense to me. But yeah, there's so much just reputation stuff, so much bullshit. If you're learning anything about crypto, it's
oh my God, that
you have
rat
to be very
nest,
careful.
I can't imagine.
For sure.
Yeah,
For
there are
sure.
so many of those channels that are just dodgy as fuck, and they're doing rug pulls, right? The number of those that I've seen broken down. There's a good channel that kind of does reviews of that called Coffeezilla, that I kind of like on YouTube. He's really good.
Coffeezilla is great. Yeah,
he broke down the one with Logan Paul and his crypto zoo thing. That was just a fucking
so funny,
train wreck. Yeah.
Oh,
but that's the thing, and it's so crazy. Like, those guys, Logan Paul and his brother. It's so funny how the rich over there, especially the rich influencers, are just a completely different animal now. Where
they're like bulletproof. It's insane.
I know. Well, that was the thing. Logan Paul's crypto zoo thing. He effectively created this cryptocurrency, pre-sold heaps. And, you had to, you bought an egg and the egg could hatch and you would get a certain animal and the animal would be worth X amount or whatever. It was like, everyone who joins makes money and no one loses money. And you're like, I don't think that's how things work financially. There's always someone losing fucking money. But he created it, and effectively, I think he had a stoush with his IT creators for the app, and they just locked it down, and then he just walked away from it, didn't say anything. And so you had people who had invested millions of dollars, collectively into this crypto thing, and then he just stopped talking about it, and no one called him out for ages. And then Coffeezilla did and broke the story down because he interviewed a lot of the people working on the project, and it turns out that Logan Paul hadn't paid them, at least allegedly. There was a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Go and see Coffeezilla's breakdown of this thing because it was just insane. But so it all got outed, and Logan Paul, it was funny, he went through those sort of initial stages of denial and then calling Coffeezilla a charlatan and a liar and trying to defame him and all this shit. And then eventually he apologizes to Coffeezilla and apologizes to everyone else and says, I'm going to refund everyone's money. And you're like, wow, would have been quicker if you just gone to that straight from the beginning. Yeah. But he just gets forgiven. I can't believe his prime bullshit drink is being sold at Woolworths. I can go down to my local Woolworths and I can find this guy's drink for sale. How does someone like that, who has been shown to have effectively, whether or not it was an intentional rug pull kind of thing where he was just trying to get people's money, I think it was probably more just the laziness of, this has turned into a headache, I can't be fucked, I'm walking away, but it's cost millions of dollars to my fans. How can someone who goes through that still just not suffer any kind of repercussions, really, besides having to say sorry and give the money back that he stole, and then that's it, and he goes on to the next thing? Blows my mind.
It's funny comparing them to the politicians where there is no forgiveness. What's the big difference between the two of them? Because, I mean, they all act in very similar ways. And we're talking about the kind of confidence and the inability to use those modal verbs and whatnot. They both have that, politicians and influencers both have that assurity, that confidence, that I know what's right sort of deal. I'm trying to actually distinguish what's the difference between them.
Well, but look at people like John Barilaro, right? He got called out by Friendly Jordy so many times for doing the most corrupt shit, and he's just dodged it all constantly. Mud doesn't seem to stick to the guy.
Is he entertaining? Because I think that might be one of the big things.
He's just a liberal. He's a liberal. Well, he's a National Party's but liberal associated politician who's just a dirtbag, and he's got friends in high places. One of the things was he was next in line for, next in line in terms of control of the country. When the Prime Minister was away, the head of the National Parties was in control of the country under their sort of coalition thing. And when he retired from that, he created a job in the US that he gave to himself. And it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million a year pay. And it got shown that he knew about all of it and he did it all. And somehow he still got away with not getting punished at all for it. He didn't end up taking the job, but it was shown that he effectively created a job for himself where he was getting paid even more money or, something ridiculous. He retires and then, was just going to slide into that job and nothing happened. And you're just like, how is this guy, how does this sort of shit happen? It's just insane, those sorts of things. But yeah, with the Prime thing, the rich influencer thing is really bizarre because when Coffeezilla was getting interviewed, he was talking about this. I think he may have been interviewed on the Decoding the Gurus podcast. So go check that out. Again, just spruiking all these things. But he was like, it's so weird when you get into their little community because their friendship group is so small and they're all these fucking rich influencers and they're just hyper competitive with one another. This guy's got a Lamborghini. I need a Lamborghini. This guy's got his own drink. I have to have a drink. He's got his own supplement. I got to have one. He's got his crypto coin. I've got to have a fucking crypto coin. And that is literally their driving thing. It's all ego, narcissism, and just, well, my best friend who's got 1 million followers, I need to get 1 million followers. I need to have more than 1 million followers so I can say to him, fuck you. I need this boxing match with Floyd Mayweather because my brother got this boxing match with this guy, and it's just it's just literally driven by that alone, effectively, with these guys. And they do not give a shit about their audience. They just want money from you. They see you as, how do I make the next thing that monetizes my audience? So it's like, okay, I've got my little my drink. I've got my little protein powder. I've got my little crypto coin now. I'm going to do boxing for the audience too because it's just ridiculously lucrative. Why did they pick boxing? Why didn't they pick jiu-jitsu? Because there's no fucking money in jiu-jitsu. There's hundreds of millions of dollars in boxing though. And it's the same thing. How do I get a fight with someone that's going to earn shitloads of money? Floyd Mayweather. He doesn't give a fuck about who he fights. He just wants the money, and he walked away with $100 million or whatever it was from that fight. So yeah, that's what blows my mind when it's so transparently obvious why these people are doing what they're doing. And yet they still have a huge audience. And you're just like, who are these, 50 million followers on YouTube that follow these morons and think they're legit businessmen legit guys, it just boggles the mind, right? And I guess a big thing, the sad thing about people like Logan Paul is their audience are probably, the median age is probably 12, right?
Yeah, they're
So
young. They're super young. Yeah.
and it is one of these things. It's probably just an escalator, right? Of just the younger coming in and the older dropping off and sort of getting disenfranchised and buggering off. But he's always got new idiots coming in that just, or ignorant people who just know nothing about it and haven't heard about his previous schemes to get money from people. Yeah, it's just mind blowing.
Have you actually? So that kind of gets into maybe it's might be preferable to have your audience kind of grow with you. So you kind of just got the same rough age group following you over the years, and that your content kind of just matures. Like with one, we're going to be talking a lot more about babies. So it's probably going to rule out some people who are of a certain age where they don't care about babies. So it'd be interesting. Like, would you see with Aussie English, for example, that when you first started it is really, really beginners and you're teaching them, this is a verb, this is how English is structured. And then now, years and years later, you are teaching them these real niche Australian slang and whatnot, or has that
I always
changed
started.
over?
I started intermediate to advanced because I'm not a qualified English teacher, and I just couldn't be fucked going to the basics. And there's so much out there with the basics that I didn't want to be another voice in the crowd there trying to teach the same old shit. So I was like, screw this. What I was interested in was helping people understand Australian English, slang, culture, expressions, and sort of listen to my content and have a head start when arriving in Australia if they were new, right? So that was the key thing that I saw, in a hole in the market where everyone was learning British and American English, and that didn't help a lot of people who had studied their entire lives and then come to Australia and they're kind of like, fuck, this place is completely different from the US. Everyone swears more. They're much more informal. They use so much more slang.
Swear the other day.
Sorry?
Hombado.
What was it?
Hombado? Hombado? Hombado.
Is that Portuguese or?
Yeah, from Brazil. Yeah, it should be.
Hombado.
Or like Rombado. Is that...
I don't know. It could be a local. Again, my Portuguese is not necessarily native level at all, so I have no idea.
Oh man, I was really hoping you would know that one.
Hombado.
Yeah, there's this Brazilian guy, Lucas, who's kind of joined the hands down crew that I hang out with a lot, and his English is decent, but he's still definitely learning and whatnot, and yeah, he'll teach us just like some swear words every now and then.
I think he may mean arrombado, which means stretched.
Arrombado. Yeah,
and that means like stretched asshole. So yes,
but
that was what I was thinking. I'm like, do you mean arrombado or just hombado? Yeah,
and he's taught us like all the different ways of saying it, where he's like ambado or like ambado.
yeah. That was one of those things. I remember my Brazilian teacher was like, you need to say this to the next Brazilian chick that you meet. And I was like, oh, that's always a good line. I'm sure it's going to be something polite. And it was like, I can't even remember. Hopefully there's no Portuguese speakers listening, but it was like, eu vou arrombar seu cozinho. It was like, I'm going to stretch your tiny little asshole effectively. I know. And you're just like, oh my, when he told me the meaning, I was just like, Jesus, I'm so using this. I remember I actually said it to my wife, not on the first date. But yeah, she laughed. She was just like, yeah, don't say that to anyone ever. And I'm like, totally going to tell people everywhere I go.
I love it.
Yeah.
That stuff's
anyway,
you can get away with so much more when you're the
dumb gringo,
non-native.
Oh, 100%. That's one of those things, you just milk it, right? And it was hard when I was learning Portuguese in particular. I would just... People always want to teach you the swearing, right? It's funny. You'll be like, oh, eu estou aprendendo português. Me ensino pouco de português. I'm learning some Portuguese. Teach me some Portuguese. And they'll be like, viado, caralho. Like all this stuff. And you're just like, whoa, Jesus Christ. When you find it, I'm like, how am I going to use this? How am I going to use this in conversation? And they just yeah, I don't know. But it is fun to, when learning a language, to learn the swear stuff, because the way that people swear in different languages is always just so fascinating, because different things are taboos, right? I was reading the history of swearing. I think it's a book called Holy Shit, and it goes through the different stages throughout, I guess, Western cultures and swearing through from, ancient Rome to present. And it was really interesting because, like, in ancient Rome, it was kind of publicly taboo for men to have sex with women or to be seen as enjoying sex with women. But you could enjoy sex with other men. But you had to be the man that was penetrating the other man. And then you were seen as the leader, right? Like you're a very masculine man because you're the penetrator. And so a swear word that they would use, I can't remember what it is, but it was effectively the receiver of the penis in the mouth, right? So it was the person who gave the blowjob, and you would call someone that to kind of demasculinize them. And it was funny because it wasn't like, it was effectively cocksucker, right? Like it was cocksucker. And that would be offensive to call another man. A woman would be like, I don't think, you just wouldn't refer to women about that sort of stuff. You wouldn't talk about it. That was kind of even worse. You would just, to have sex with women was done to procreate, and that was it. It was really interesting. So they were talking about the whole cultural thing. But yeah, it was really funny to learn that the most offensive thing you could say to another man was to call him effectively a cocksucker, right? Or someone who gave blowjobs to other men.
Yeah, very interesting.
And then it transitioned into, like, throughout the Middle Ages, or the Dark Ages to the Middle Ages, it was much more religious based. So in Western cultures, it would be, this is where we get all the holy shit, or God damn, or
oh my God,
all of that stuff was. That was what was really offensive to people, to take the Lord's name in vain and use that much more than saying things like fuck and shit and cunt and dick, because also during that period, everyone lived in effectively a one-room house. And so you saw people shitting and pissing and fucking and naked all the time, and it wasn't offensive. It was just like, that's just, it'd be like me and you referring to someone's wrist or their fingers or something, go finger yourself, whatever. But it was really interesting that at that time that wasn't an issue. And only once we got to, I think, about the 1600s, 1700s, when houses started having multiple rooms inside of them, and you would have bedrooms where people would go to sleep, to have sex, to do things in private. Then all of a sudden you have the swear words about sex and shit and piss and all of these excrement related things. Once society starts becoming a little pruder and cleaning itself up, and you're no longer defecating in public and dumping the pee and the poo just in the street or whatever, once that becomes effectively behind closed doors, all of a sudden those words become way more powerful in terms of offensive language. And also, once Western societies become less and less religious, the holy shit, goddamn stuff no longer really means much at all to the average person and loses its offensiveness. So it was really interesting learning about the kind of history of swearing and when and how it's changed based on what a society deems as offensive at a certain time.
Yeah, the only thing I can add to this that I know of is how you get more racist, misogynistic, offensive when you swear in another language, because you don't know the impact of it, of how bad it is or whatnot. We're teaching our friend cunt, and you can use cunt in really funny ways. Catch a cunt, like look at this stupid cunt over here, blah blah blah. And he walked in one day and he's like to this girl Belle, and he's like, "Hey cunt, what's up?" And we're just like, "Dude, no, you can't use it like that."
Whoa, you're gonna get cancelled.
Yeah, it was so yeah, there are just and it makes sense, right? You just don't know the words themselves, so if the
hardest thing though is you don't know how to use them until you use them. And so I'm sure that as bad a situation as that was probably an incredibly important learning experience for that young gentleman who would who would instantly be like, I have one point of data now to understand how rude that word is. So, okay, I've just done a little experiment and I've received my data back, and I have gotten information now about where that word sits on the hierarchy of offensive-ness. And so it is hard. When I was learning Portuguese, played around with swear words all the time. Again, I tried to do it with people I knew in relaxed situations and everything, or I'd even just ask them, like, if I said this now, would this be okay? Is this the proper situation? Like, I remember, what's a good example? My wife, lesbians in Portuguese are called big shoes, right? She says sapatão. and zapato is like
Zapato, yeah.
shoe,
Same-
right? Yeah,
same in Spanish.
zapato. You put like at the end of something masculine to make it big, or ona to make it a feminine thing big. And so I remember saying, like, I was looking for my shoes that were rather big, and I remember saying, "Cares meus sapatões," and she was just like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Where are you lesbians?" And it was so funny because I learned, because they use the word like that, sapatão, for lesbian, they won't use it for shoe.
For shoes, yeah.
Yeah. And so they'll avoid those kind of, even though grammatically it makes sense to use that in that situation. And you would say, like, you would use the ending on something else similar, where are my big socks or something. But because it's shoe and it sounds like lesbian, or the word they use for lesbian, they won't use it. But it was really interesting having that conversation and that interaction. I was kind of like, oh, okay, so now I'm sort of gauging where this word sits, how I can use it, when I can use it. And it was another thing, like learning about, there's a really gross word for vagina in Portuguese, grelo, right? Grelo. It's like grelo, grelo. And in the north of Brazil, there was Lula, the president of Brazil, used this once in a speech referring to a woman. And in the north, it means for a woman to be incredibly strong, right? She was, a grello, effectively. It was like saying she was a mad cunt. And if someone didn't understand how you're using the word cunt there, they would think, oh my God, you just called a woman a cunt. And it was really interesting because all the people, the conservatives who didn't like Lula in the South, got really offended and were like, no, he was being misogynistic. He was calling her a cunt effectively. Yeah. And my wife's from the North and she's like, no, he was being really positive, saying that this, other politician was strong as and a really good leader and everything. And it was really funny just learning those things again of like, this is regional. The language can be used like cunt, right? We can use it in a very positive way. He's a mad cunt, or he's an absolute, cunt piece of shit. And the same word can have completely opposite meanings. So yeah, swearing in any language, I think, is always really funny and crucial to kind of learn whether or not you actually end up using it. Like the word grello, I've probably said it more in this episode than I've ever said it in Portuguese, but it's just, I don't know, it's funny. Swearing is just really fascinating to learn and understand what people get upset about or what they use or find offensive. And in Portuguese, it's really bizarre because there's so much sexualized expressions that are normal, where they'll use words like penis and vagina, and it's kind of like a fine expression to use in front of children. And then they'll have other words for the same thing that they'll be like, no, you never say those things, right? Or you do, but it's in this situation. And so I always find that side of language, any language, just really, really peculiar and fun to kind of learn. I'm sure it was the same in Spanish. They would have swear words up the wazoo, right?
There's so many. And one of the things I'm not sure if I regret it or not, but I intentionally chose not to learn a lot of them. Yeah. Just because I just didn't want to come across that way to people, because it was, I was mixing not only with, I suppose, people who would enjoy it, natives and whatnot, who were playing soccer or doing things, but I would also be, with my girlfriend at the time, with her parents. And so it was kind of like, it's probably better just not to make this part of my everyday speech, even though...
You can learn it without using it.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, my experience in the mining industry was you can learn stuff without even realizing. And it was after I came back to Brisbane, after living in Mackay and being up there for so long, for 3 years, where I was just, I went, whoa, I need to modify my speech because I swear way, way too much. Yeah.
I do too. And I can tell even just from how you and I talk, but it's one of those things that's so difficult because it's kind of like, again, people can choose to be offended just because you use it, and they're not really offended by why or how you're using it or the context. And that aspect of it has always really frustrated me. And I wonder if that's part of the reason that I do swear more frequently now in conversation. Because like if you were to listen to the Average Aussie English podcast, I'm not going to necessarily be swearing in the informative episodes where I'm trying to teach people English, or unless it's specifically about that, or I have a reason to do it. But then with interviews, I'm trying to be my authentic self, and I'm trying to use this language because it's important for the listener, at least in terms of English learners, to learn how people use this language and in what examples and emphasizing things when they're offended, when they're condemning someone, so it is such a battle. It was really interesting. There are so many podcasts out there, again, that teach English that never swear. And I would have so many people chatting to me about this. They would come to Australia and they're like, everyone swears. They're so horrible. They're so rude. And I'm like, it's not about the word that's being used. It's how it's being used. It's not about, it's the context. The context is everything. And Australians, by and large, as a population, tend to swear more than British people. But it's just a way of expressing themselves in a certain informality because they're trying to be friendly a lot of the time. I mean, they may not be, when they're upset and they're offended, they're also swearing. But I think that's probably where the overlap is with Americans, Brits, and Australians. We all swear when we get upset. But yeah, it is one of these. All right, language and swearing is just so interesting. And it always perplexes me when I hear Japanese has no swear words, but it's more of the tone they use or how they speak to one another. And you're kind of like, that's really interesting. I would love to reincarnate myself in Japan and learn that culture, because I feel like it would just be so different from the culture that I've grown up in, probably about as different as it can get, for better or worse, and just really fascinating, those things. What are the real taboos in Japan, right? Like compared to Australia.
Yeah. I've got a friend who's trying to bring back some like a different way of swearing or insulting by using many small words. So he's like, he prefers to call someone a big dumb idiot. Just combine these huge phrases, and you can go back to see some of these like we're talking about with old TV commercials and whatnot. I think some of the swearing in that was really good, or not swearing, but like insults and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. When it's creative. Isn't that the same thing with Spanish though? They'll often not necessarily just use a single word, but they'll have some really insane description, like I shit on the grave of the whore of the mother that gave birth to you. And it would be like, if you said that in English, we would just laugh, because it's like, Jesus, what picture are you painting? Like, and how descriptive was that? That was really thought out.
A full paragraph of an insult. Yeah.
Whereas if you did that in Portuguese or Spanish, they would be like, how dare you? Once you finally once you finally finish speaking this insult, I am going to be so offended.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is where maybe with German, I will actually start learning it, because German's famous for the conjoined words. They just put all
compound
of these
adjectives
words
in that, right?
Yeah, and Verbindungsgemeinschaft or whatever. Like that's not a word. I just made it up, but
sounds like one.
Yeah, I know. And they're really infamous for this, and I think I really hope there's some really, really funny swears, which are just these, conjoined words, which if you took them apart individually.
There was one that blew my mind. I remember, I think, and this is where like, it is funny when you take swear words from one language and put it into another and it doesn't have the same meaning. So like if you were to say in English, Scheiße or Scheißenhausen or whatever it is for like shit house, you could say Scheißenhausen or Scheißehaus or whatever it is, and it not really be offensive at all. But if you were to say that to a German, they'd probably be like, how dare you? I remember seeing Angela Merkel saying, das ist ein Shitstorm. Das ist ein, like a huge shitstorm. And I remember being like, holy fuck. She's just like saying that on TV to the media in front of everyone. Das ist ein Shitstorm. And it turns out that they had taken the word shitstorm, which we would use in English for what, like a really fucked up situation, right?
Bad thing, yeah.
And they used it for something in the media when the media creates a storm or an issue, and they call it a shitstorm. But it's not rude. It's not like if you were to say a Scheißen, whatever the storm is in German, that would be offensive. But it was really funny that they had just taken this English swear word and used it publicly, and it was fine to use for a certain example like that. And I remember being in France. I went there when I was a teenager for a school trip, and it was always so amazing how many of the kids would just use English swear words and just pepper them throughout their language. And I remember sitting at the dinner table one time, and there were two girls at the other end that were my age, and they were like, speaking French, but then dropping fuck all the time, or cunt in the middle of it. And the parents just eating dinner and just being like, lol, because they didn't speak English. And I was just there like, holy shit, looking around just like, what is going on?
That's awesome. That's super cool. Did you ever learn any programming languages, Pete?
No. I mean, bits and pieces with R and Python for statistics at university, but never C++
Fully
or
get into it, yeah.
all that sort of stuff. My brother-in-law is doing all that at the moment. It seems way over my head.
Yeah, I tried to learn some Python this last year, and basically I've gotten to the point where I don't feel it's worth it, and I did this whole episode, the
took
last
a year.
episode. Well, I didn't do a full year. It was probably, I don't know, 40 hours worth.
I opened the book twice. Yeah.
Yeah, I got through a couple of books. But
Yeah.
it was. I eventually came to the conclusion that with ChatGPT and AI, I think I can kind of get around what it is that I want to do, and there's no inherent joy in learning a programming language like there is for learning Spanish or German. And
you're not using it for communication the same way, right?
Exactly, and it kind of boiled down to you're communicating with a machine, and machines, their communication operates in very different ways. You can have
you make a single
code.
Mistake, and they're like, "What?
Yep.
What?
Yep.
What?"
Whereas,
and you're like, "Come on, man, intuit it."
Yeah, you can make 50 mistakes in a paragraph in English, and I can still probably get what it is that you're trying to say. I can still roughly get it. So, I did a whole episode on that for anyone who was interested in that. It was the one that comes out just before this. And
well, that's going to be so interesting how AI ends up changing the world, because you can't. It's kind of like we're looking into the abyss,
it's already made its way into your podcast. I listened to those 2 episodes.
Did you?
Yeah,
I found it.
They're not great.
No,
I think
they're pretty cheap. They're pretty cheap. So yeah, the for anyone who can't be fucked looking them up, they were episodes that I created using ChatGPT to write the episode, and then I think it's called. I got it up here.
I remember the girl's name was Rachel in the second one.
Yeah, 11 Labs is what it's called. Prime Voice AI, and it's frightening how good the reader now is of text. So it sounds like an audiobook. Sounds like someone reading an audiobook. So I mean, it's not perfect. But compared to back in the day when we had those like Google plugins that would read out a news story or something.
Yeah.
Oh, way better. And it just goes to show, like, this has happened in the last year, and you're sort of like, where is this going to be in 10 years or 50 years? Like, holy shit, we're on the precipice of something, insane happening. And we can go into a whole conversation here. Bring it back to music. When AI gets into music, how is it going to get into music, and what aspects of music writing and production and everything like that is it going to change? And is it going to be a good thing or a bad thing? Because I feel like it would be really cool if I could take my favorite album, say Themata by Carnival, right? An Australian band called Carnival, Karv, Nivoll.
Yeah.
If I could take that album and just chuck it into an AI thing and just say, make 50 songs like this style, and with the singer the same, with the guitars and everything, the same tones and everything, but just write 50 different songs similar to this. The Carnival are inherently long in their production of albums. It's like 4 years between that and the next one, and then like
kind of like
8.
Tool.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine if I could just sit down and the computer could pump out album after album after album of the same style music but different. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? If Carnival could just do that, write an album and then get the AI to create it, would you listen to it? Would you not listen to it? So it was interesting, like with the Drake stuff that I was looking up. I think it was Rick Beato talking about the Drake stuff, and he was saying that people were listening to it and they loved it and they didn't give a shit that it was made by an AI because it sounded like Drake. And so it is really funny that I had this conversation with someone recently. They're like, would you still listen to music or read books if you found out it was written by AI? And I'm like, I don't really give a shit who created it. It's whether or not I feel like it is subjectively good or entertaining, right? Like there's that aspect to it. But then there's the other side of I'm not necessarily going to be impressed the same way as if it's an AI that's done it. I'm not going to be sitting there like, wow, that AI is fucking badass. I want to learn more about him and his talents. It's just going to be that I'm going to kind of enjoy it for what it is. So I don't think on the other side that there is going to be a loss of people performing, say, live music or, becoming good guitarists or artists, no longer being able to paint paintings because AI can do an objectively better job and pump out way more material, because we're still going to have that as humans. We're still going to be like, I want to see what's possible for a human to do. And I want to see that reproduced in front of me. I want to be able to go and see paintings done by humans. I may enjoy AI paintings, but I'm not going to go to a museum necessarily full of AI paintings and have my mind blown the same way that if I saw this 12-year-old girl who's just a savant painter recreating Rembrandt's, in her bedroom. That's going to have a completely different effect to if you have an AI doing the same thing. So yeah, it is. I feel like there's going to be a position for it. It's going to take jobs, but it's probably not going to take over everything, because we're going to still want to see the pursuit of perfection by other human beings and what's possible by humans, because we already know who watches chess games from AI versus AI. No one watches them. No one gives a shit about AI versus AI chess games, or even human versus AI anymore. And the AI shits all over us with how good they are at these games. And they've been able to beat humans for, decades now with whatever it is, Deep Blue or whatever that did it in the 90s. But that was like, it happened once and then everyone was like, okay, and then let's go back to watching the humans compete.
Yeah, I think the interesting discussion is what's going to happen in that gray zone. So I think there is always going to be a market for the individual creator who does it all on their own, the young girl and whatnot, and that's because of the story behind it. And I'll give an example for this soon. I think there's going to be a huge market for the AI itself and just completely AI, and we've probably been consuming this for a while without even noticing. Banners on ads or random stuff on the internet where it's just a filler space of a picture or something like that, totally created. Some of the thumbnails, for example, that I create is some of the background completely AI generated. It's not meant to be a wow thing in itself. It's more just showing like, oh, this is roughly what this episode is going to have contained within it, and it shows that I put in a little bit of effort into utilizing this portion of the podcast cover art that you can use. But what's going to happen in this gray zone? Will there be debates about, this person used 60% AI and only 40% was genuine creation? Where will that exist and sit? And so
it was stuff I was watching on this where it's like there's going to be all these jobs pop up which will be AI prompters, right?
Yeah,
people using AI to do certain things, but being the prompters to do so. And so I think it'll be one of those things where there'll be no issue as long as it's transparent. But if you're being a charlatan, if you're
claiming
there's been examples of people entering photos and stuff into competitions that are made by AI. I think the ones that I've heard of, they actually say that they're done by AI, whether or not it's before they win. But they come out and say, I can't accept the prize because it was made by AI and this was a test to see, whether or not it would win. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see that sort of stuff come forward and be like, how much can this be used disingenuously to what's it going to do for the learning world, like the education system and how people are tested? If you can just get an AI to sit down and write a 5,000 word essay on the life of Ned Kelly and whether or not he was a good human being, can you any longer have homework or have exams where you mark people on them going home and writing an essay on anything, because the tools are available to do it in a matter of minutes? And you can probably also just say, make it a B+ one, not an A+ one, because I don't want it to look like I faked it. Add in 10% grammatical errors, So it'll be interesting to see how that adapts.
Teachers I've chatted with some teachers here in Brisbane who the kids are already doing it, and it's kind of like, well, what do you do? And I'm sure there'll be some solution or something to this, but the solution might not be great. And then it's like, well, okay, well, maybe we need to redesign.
Give me a 5-minute talk.
Probably overdue for it.
It'll be produce it in real time.
Yeah, exactly.
Show me that you understand the information by reproducing it on the spot. And so, but it'll just be a game of adaptation. And I think, fortunately, the good side of it is that we're going to be able to do a shitload of things that we couldn't previously do, or that took a huge amount of time. Like I think someone just used an AI machine or an AI program to estimate or calculate or write out all of the different 11 billion proteins. And I think I can't remember what the exact number was, but it was something ridiculous like that. And they worked it out and they said, if a human had to do this using the technology that they have that didn't include an AI, it would take 2 billion years to do every single protein and have it go through the scientific process to determine what it is. And the AI did it in a very, very, very short period of time and just smashed out that work and had that done there you go, science. There you go, medical profession. You have all of the proteins known to humankind, now written out, transcribed in front of you that would have otherwise taken 2 billion years of human time to achieve the same thing, right? So like, yeah, if you had 2 billion human beings working on this project who were experts, they could get it done in a year, you know? So that's how quickly the AI smashed it out.
Yeah.
And so
the consumption aspect, I think, is a really interesting portion as well. So you were talking about, okay, there's a band Carnival you'd really enjoy. If it just produces albums, will you listen to it? I think the thing is, it's more if you seek it out yourself. Because I was chatting with someone recently, and so much of the recommendation system for music and whatnot, it's just because I like certain things doesn't mean I want more of that same thing. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, a song that's really caught me recently is, I think it's called Gouchy or Gousey, Irritating. It's just one I randomly heard on Triple J. I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, this is awesome. It's never something that I would seek out on my own. It kind of came to me and was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is great. Nor do I want to hear something that is similar to it. And so it's kind of like, I think a lot of the consumption will be, this is where it's getting to the adaptability of you being able to type things in. And it's like, okay, I want to see the Little Mermaid, but she's living in a underwater technological society instead of just an underwater society or something. And seeking out that, and then other people who can have these creations of things that you think are really funny. One that I came across probably 2 days ago, it's called Harry Spotter. And it's basically these people who have used, I'm not sure what AI system it is. I think the one that starts with L, I always forget the name of it. It creates visual images and whatnot. And basically what they've done is they've created this character called not this character, it's Harry Spotter, and it's a 1 minute, 2 minute long video where they've used this software to create visual images of Harry Potter characters if they were gym goers and gym rats. And so they're all like bulked up, they're massive. I
saw something similar to that where it was like famous actors working in a Chinese fish market.
Yep. Or another popular one is Balenciaga, like YouTubers, YouTube by Balenciaga or something like that. And it's all playing, the same music that would typically be on a Balenciaga. I don't know. I've never actually seen any of their ads or anything like that. So I assume that's what it was like.
I think I saw that with fashion, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this Harry Spotter one was great because they'd put funk music on top of it, which is this kind of like heavy bass with like cowbell and jazz samples. It's used for like kind of like late night drift funk. There's all this random stuff to it.
Well, you wonder if people are going to end up making their own entertainment that way. Because like, imagine if you could just create a TV show by prompting the AI to be like, write a TV show in the style of the Harry Potter films, but they're not wizards, they're Jedis, and the main character is a 50-year-old lesbian African American. Yeah. And these key points happen. She has a romantic interest who is a bucket. And, like you could just sit there and prompt it up, and the AI within a certain amount of time just literally spits out an entire TV show for you to consume.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is fan fiction. There is a tremendous desire for this. Fan fiction is huge. There are people whose jobs, livelihoods are based on them creating fan fictions of these already created works. And so, yes, 100% I can see that happening. What I think there'll be a need for those individual artist creators though who create those things. If this
that's
was
where the creativity comes
Harry
into
Spotter,
it, right?
For example. Yeah. The Harry Spotter is not funny if it's based on random characters who I have no affiliation with nor care about. It's just random people now doing things. And the cool thing with the Harry Spotter stuff was they had the images, and then the mouths and heads would kind of move, and then they would also have this text-based, importing Dumbledore's voice in, giving text to it, and then it would then be like, those who enter the forbidden corridor in the second room, expressly forbidden to lift the forbidden weight or whatnot.
Yeah.
And then it's like, playing on that and whatnot. And it was the playing on of scenes from the movies and then introducing like a gym meme into that was what it made really funny and made me watch it once or twice, 3 times over.
Well,
So it's, I definitely see a lot more of it's going towards that individual consumption, but you still need a creativity, a brand, something that is strong to kind of anchor it, to back it up.
Well, people have to know about it, right? It can't just be a random. There's a video that's on YouTube of like President Trump, Biden, and Obama arguing over which Dragon Ball Z seasons are the best. And it's like an hour long, and of them like ranking them. And
I've seen a snippet of it. Yeah,
it's hilarious. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think the fact that the reason it's funny is because it's 3 famous people you know of that would never be talking about another thing that you know of, and then their voice is doing it, right? Like you could never get them to actually do it. So that's what makes it really hilarious. If they were actually Dragon Ball Z fans that were really arguing over this shit, it would probably nowhere near be as funny as it is, right? Like, so, you know, imagine, well, it'd be pretty funny, but, that sort of creative stuff is going to be really interesting. But then the whole other side of it, right, is how is it going to be used maliciously, for hacking purposes, for impersonating identification information of other people.
Aussie English podcasts start popping up, and they're so good that, individual people who'd never heard of you before, didn't have your RSS feed as a source of truth. They just go to that and assume that's a real deal.
How I can imagine you just get to a point where you just say, okay, download the Aussie English podcast, 1,205 episodes, recreate every single episode, but change the subject matter by 50%, and then re-upload as the Australian English podcast. So it will be really interesting to see how much the AI changes society, changes the way we behave, changes what we consume, changes the way that we think of things, how we're going to see identification too. Like, I can imagine that fraud is going to be so much easier, but you'll have this kind of like battle between being able to do it and being able to detect it and stop it. So it's one of those things where, I just hope I live long enough for some really interesting shit to happen as a result of these kinds of like technological advances, because you always hear people talking about it and they're like, oh, it's 500 years into the future. And I'm kind of like, fuck, I'm not going to live that long. I want to see it happen in the next 50 years. Come on, like something interesting happen.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I think we're right on that point now of probably what social media was like back in, I don't know, 2006 or something, where it's 10 years later, you look at it and it's like, holy shit, this is dominating everything, and so much time is being spent on it.
Well, like iPhones, right? When they first came in, or just smartphones, where you had all of a sudden all these other devices that were just able to fit in a single device in your hand. You wonder how much AI is just going to completely make all of these tasks that you otherwise had to do over hours or days, or pay someone a shitload of money to do for you, and they're just going to reduce it to cents on the dollar and instantaneous, effectively.
Do you have any plans to use it? Are you starting to use it in any areas of your life?
I could use it for Aussie English. Write me, lessons for Australian slang. So write me, what are the 10 most popular locations in Australia to visit and why?
Are you starting to do that? Will you do that though, do you think?
I was about to say AI. My virtual assistant, so VA, is using it already to sort of come up with ideas. And again, you can just sit on there and be like, give me 10 ideas for episodes about Australian English or about Australian culture and that's the main place that I would see myself using it currently. It would be more the initial stages of creating content. So give me a list of 100 ideas for X, and then maybe I pull out 10 that I think are, okay, these are worth fleshing out. And you could still use the app, like write me 10 structures for episodes on blah, 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 blah. You pick the best one and then you add your changes. I can't see myself completely being removed from the process. But yeah, I could already, I can sign up for 11 Labs. I can upload podcast material that I've recorded, and I can teach it to use my voice. And then I can write content using ChatGPT. about certain things and then just get my voice to read it out, which I'll probably do when I'm sick, you know?
Yeah.
So like I did in the past, but it was with an American woman's voice. So yeah, using that sort of thing, I can imagine it making my life a lot easier.
Did you get any feedback from those episodes?
Yeah, well, I had a lot from the first one. The first one was effectively me just dicking around with ChatGPT and seeing if it could write a small essay about a topic. And I think it was like the AI's escape from the lab into Australia, into the outback, and it's paired up with the native animals to take over the world. Write me
into
1,000
a koala
words.
Specifically. And then
Yeah, that's
koala.
right, into a koala. And it was just really interesting. I did it for my own sort of interest. And then once it wrote the story out in front of my eyes and I was watching it doing it in real time, just like, holy shit, this is really impressive that it kind of has... It can work out, or it just spontaneously creates these stories. Like it knew to use other native Australian animals and not just randomly insert a wolf, you know, or a donkey or something that you wouldn't find here in the wild. And it was just really impressive to use. So once I did that, I was like, oh, I wonder if I can find an AI that reads this stuff out and does it sound natural? And when I did, I was like, oh, I'll make it an episode out of it. And then I thought at the end, I was like, maybe other people can give me prompts. You know, give me a suggestion for what to create an episode out of. And I had someone message me on Instagram, and that was the second episode. I thought, oh, screw it, I'll just use his suggestion. And he got back to me afterwards and was like, that was amazing. Like, not the episode wasn't mind-blowing, but it was amazing that he could give me feedback to do it. And then I did it and put it out there, and he was like, thank you. But I don't know, it was just something funny to do. So, but yeah, I think I'll probably avoid just using it all the time. For that sort of thing, I think it would kill the listenership, because that's it. People at the end of the day still want a human on the other end in this sort of example.
I wouldn't seek out those episodes from you. That'd be a hindrance and wants to be avoided, to be honest.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, I'll probably use them for, again, if I don't know a topic. So like Ned Kelly, if I wanted to write an episode on Ned Kelly, a famous Australian bushranger, an outlaw in the 1800s, 1870s, I would probably say to ChatGPT, you know, give me a summary of his life in 1,000 words, and then I would flesh it out. Or I would say, write an essay of 5,000 words on the life of Ned Kelly, and then I would go through it, adjust it, change bits, add bits in, or, you know, do things like that. But it's mainly just passing over that initial dead time, the time that's kind of wasted of just doing this mundane research using Google or whatever, or reading books. If the ChatGPT can do all of that in an instant, why would I not use it to do it? You know, it saves me a shitload of time, and I can focus on pumping out 10 episodes in the time that it would take me to do one otherwise, right?
Yeah, for sure. Cool. I think that's a good place to end it, Pete. Thanks so much for spending all this time and chatting. It's always so much fun, man. So these are the easiest episodes because I don't need to do any prep. I just rock up and then we just chat.
That's what I was going to say. This is so much easier than Aussie English. I just get to talk about shit on the podcast with a friend, and then you know, the good thing is too, you don't have to transcribe it like I do. So I'm like looking, I'm like, shit, we're past the 2-hour mark. This would be a fucking nightmare. To transcribe it.
I only recently, I'm such an idiot. I've been meaning to. One of the reasons I never was doing transcriptions was because just paying for it, and you know, Juan and I do long episodes, and we do tons of them, so it would have just cost tons, and no one was asking for it, so I was like, oh, well, unless people are asking for it, I'm not going to do it. Idiot of myself, I never realized that in Premiere Pro, which I use for video editing, you can use it. I just had no idea that functionality was in there.
I didn't either.
So I just hit transcribe, comes out. Sure, it always gets mere mortals wrong, gets my name wrong, and I'm not pedantic as long as it's 95% good. That's good enough for me. So
do you know what happened with mine when I do it automatically with the software we use? Aussie English becomes Aussie Anguish. Because of my pronunciation. I think it doesn't have an Australian pronunciation thing. For whatever reason, it hears English when I say it as anguish. And so it used to always trigger me, man. I'm like, really? That's what you think of me?
Jesus. And it didn't have the ability to learn that this is something you're going to say all the time. So
I don't do it anymore, so I assume that it's sorted out. But at the time when I was doing all the transcripts for my own episodes, that was something that always came up, and I would just be like, fuck me, again? Like, anguish, it just triggers me.
Yeah, see, that's really important for you. For me, it's kind of like, as long as it's mostly good, I'm all right.
I know, I have to do punctuation, everything like that. So 2 hours worth, I'd be like, fuck, this is going to be an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
It's usually about 4 hours per hour. So Yeah.
Is it? Damn, that is insane. Yeah, no,
It's about 4 times as long to transcribe something as the thing being transcribed usually. And that was for me,
whoa.
a native speaker who was used to it. When I was getting other people to do it, it took
Was it
forever.
so? What was that? Was that you individually typing out words, or was
No,
that you
so that's me using.
editing
There's a program website called Sonix,
Otter?
Sonix, and it does most of it using AI. But then it always has issues with grammar, or not grammar, but like spelling of words or punctuation, when to start a new paragraph, all that sort of stuff. And so, because it's an English podcast, it was one of those things where the average person who's a native speaker wouldn't have any issue understanding what's going on, but I want it to be correct so that people can use it to study. Anyway.
Yeah. Oof, rough. Jeez. Yeah. So if well, we've talked about Aussie English tons. You also have Pete vs Plants on YouTube. People wanting to get into that.
Yeah,
soon,
it's all good.
Soon there'll be Pete's guitar workshop or something.
Well,
like
I was
that.
thinking, I'm like, man, that's going to take a lot longer to get some experience enough to be able to create something entertaining on YouTube for that sort of thing. So I don't think that's coming anytime soon. But yeah, we'll see.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. Thanks
for having me,
we
dude.
also have those 5 other episodes we've done. So if people want to know more, just jump back into the back catalogue and search
That's it.
Pete SMISSEN and on the mere models, and you'll find a whole bunch.